Hey guys, it's Mr. Kenny back with another video, and this one's going to be dealing with fungi. And probably the most famous fungi that you can think of is a mushroom. I mean, that's what I think of, but we're also like our bread molds and our molds that may be found on strawberries, etc. Now, when we think of fungi, they are eukaryotic. They are heterotrophic, which is a misconception a lot of times because if I were to ask a lot of people what fungi are, a lot of times they would think they're plants, but they're not. Mushrooms are not plants. They're heterotrophic, which means they feed on other organisms, and they do this by absorption. Most of them are multicellular. The yeast are the exception. A lot of yeast are single cell. They have chitin in their cell wall, which is a polysaccharide base, and this is different from having cellulose like a plant does. And they can reproduce sexually and asexually. Now, when we look at the structure of a fungi, it has a thing called a mycelium, which is our thread-like cells. They stretch out like a branching network, and they have these hyphae, which are body filament cells, and they can be two types. The hyphae are, there's a picture right here. This picture is a picture of the hyphae right here. And these hyphae either can have separation or separation of them, which they form different cells. But in this case, if that's the case, they would have pores, and that would be what we call septate, in which they have individual cells and they have individual cytoplasm. Now, they can also have it where they don't have any separation. It's like one great big cell, and that is called coenzytic, which means it has a continuous cytoplasm. So they don't have these little cross pores, walls that they need. Cells have multinuclei. They have more than one nuclei in their cells, and their cell wall, once again, is made of chitin, which is similar to what insects and some arthropods, maybe a crab, for example, would have in their cell walls. Now, the mode of nutrition, like I said, is heterotrophic. So that means they eat on other things, and they do this by secreting an enzyme. This enzyme breaks down the material, the protein material that's there, or the nutrients, and then they absorb it into their bodies. Now, when you think about fungi, there's actually three types. They can be parasitic, which some can be pathogens, which mean they cause disease, and that would be ones that feed on living organisms. They actually hook onto the living organism and feed on it, and they could be pathogenic, could be harmful. Most of them are mutualistic, which means they could help out. They get something from the relationship. An example would be like inside of termites. Termites have a fungi that lives inside of it and helps it break down plant material. So it gets nutrients from breaking down a plant material, and the termite is able to break down wood. And without this relationship, termites wouldn't be able to eat wood. And then the one that's most important to us, I guess, is probably decomposers. And decomposer is one that breaks down dead remains and returns it back. That might be ones like you see growing on trees or around an animal carcass or somewhere on the ground. They're returning nutrients back to the soil. Now, reproduction-wise, like I said, they can do asexual and sexual reproduction. Asexual is usually done by budding, which is illustrated up here in this picture, in which a small piece would break off and form two separate organisms. That's budding or asexual reproduction. And then they can reproduce sexually, and they usually do this by spores. I kind of think of spores like gametes, and you have these positive and negative haploid spores. Haploid means they have half the genetic information, right? So when they join together, you get this diploid organism. So they can reproduce usually both ways. Now, if we talk about specialized lifestyles within fungi, you have the molds. The molds are like penicillin is the most famous, I guess, but you might find on cheese or to make antibiotics. Now, the molds are only seen in their asexual stage, and they have asexual spores, so that's important. It kind of looks over here to the right, this green up here at the top. And yeast are unicellular, asexual, budding is how they reproduce, and that would be like you find on bread molds. Now, other things is lichens. Lichens are what we call the pioneering species because they're the first ones that come into an area and start forming soil. Like after a volcanic eruption, they're linked to what we call primary succession, which we'll get into in ecology. They're also a real good detector of air pollution because they don't survive very well when the air is polluted. You don't see lichens. They die very easily. Another thing that I need to mention is a mycorrhiza. which is the root and the fungi mutualism in plants. About 95% of all vascular plants have this fungi growing with it, and it actually helps them pull in nutrients and water into the roots. You know, it's very vital. If you can look at the picture down here at the bottom, one with the fungus and one without, the one with it is growing a lot better. So it's a mutualistic relationship for both of them. You know, 90 to 95% of all vascular plants have these. Let's talk a little bit about fungi diversity and go to the phylums. The first phylum is the phylum Chytrididimycota, and please forgive me on any pronunciation if I do it incorrectly, but they are the aquatic fungi, and they actually have flagellum, and they are the closest lineage to the protists in which fungi arose. Next, you have the Zygomycota, which are ones that are mutualistic with. They have the mycorrhiza, which is the mutualistic part to the plant roots that I just mentioned earlier, and they're most famous for the food molds like the bread, strawberry, etc. They have the rhizopus, which is the food molds that you see down here in the bottom right-hand corner. They also have what's called zygiosporangia, which are resistant structures to like freezing and drying, so they can survive through harsh conditions. Now, it was believed that these two phylum were the only two phylums on this page here originally, but recently, because of molecular data, we know that there's things called the third phylum down here, the glomerulocytes, which account for about 90% of all plant species have this mutualistic glomerulocyte, and they were once thought to be the phylum Zygomycota. Now, the last two phylums are the phylum Ascomycota, which does like sac fungi, yeast, truffles. You know, they reproduce sexually by spores called asci, and they reproduce asexually by spores called conidia. The next phylum is the Basidiomycotas, which are your club funguses, your mushrooms, your puffballs, your shell fungus, etc. And they were reproduced by spores called basiocarps. And this is the ones that would, if you stepped on them, they would shoot them all over the place, so that would spread out spores by the wind pretty easily. All right, I hope this gives you a brief introduction into fungi. Please do excuse the way I pronounce some of these. And I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.